All right, good morning, everyone. Thank you for being on time. We're gonna go ahead and get started right away. We just have a couple more slides to go through for lecture 10, and then we're gonna move right on to lecture 11. Last class, we were talking about the organization of muscle from the gross level all the way to the um, individual cellular level. Remember, gross means like the entire thing, just looking at it with your naked eye, and we basically zoom in a little bit at a time. Eventually, we were able to got to the individual cellular level. So perhaps just take a moment to refresh our memory a little bit with the structures here. This is straight from your study guide. I'm going to go ahead and copy it over to kind of refresh your memory of all the important terms. Okay, so here it is. Okay, so again, this is a whole muscle, and this portion connects the muscle to your bones, and it's called a tendon. Okay, so tendon connects muscle to bone, and ligaments connect bones to bones. So there's the tendon, and to remind you, the entire muscle is covered with a layer of connective tissue. That is the epimysium. Okay, epimysium covers entire muscle. Yep. Now, one of these things, I'm going to outline it for you. This thing right here. Okay, this thing right here, right, which is basically like this whole thing. Okay, so one of these things is called a fascicle. A fascicle. So fascicle is covered by perimysium. Perimysium, which would be like, you know, this thing right here. If you need to color it, that's the perimysium. And I'm not gonna color it. I guess I can color it. This whole thing at the surface, that would be the epimysium. I can do a better job with the coloring than me. And the fascicle is basically a bundle of muscle fiber. So muscle fibers, that's a muscle fiber. That's a muscle fiber. And then this thing that got pulled out, and this here, that's also a muscle fiber. Okay, so that right here is muscle fiber, which, by the way, is equivalent to a cell, muscle cell. A single muscle cell is called a muscle fiber. Right? So the entire muscle is consists of multiple fascicles, and each fascicle is consists of multiple muscle fibers or muscle cells. And the muscle cell is going to be covered by another layer of connective tissue, which is right here. So we'll say covered by endomysium. Okay, right underneath the endomysium would be the cell membrane already, okay, which is called the sarcolemma. We went through that last time. And inside the muscle cell, inside the muscle fiber, you would have all the normal cell organelles with the mitochondria, endoplasmic reticulum, and all those things. Even though sometimes they might go by different names, but they are pretty much the same thing. Okay? But what's kind of unique in the muscle cells that other cells don't have would be these contractile fibers, which we call myofibrils. Myofibrils. Okay, so muscle fiber is covered by the endomysium, and it is going to contains myofibrils. Right? So that's sort of where we left off last time. Um, we can draw a myofibril out. Right? We could try to draw it out. And the myofibrils are basically series of repeating units. Okay. Uh, each of these things is called a sarcomere, which is the contractile unit of muscle. Remember, muscles can only contract, shorten, but not lengthen. And the shortening is caused by these sarcomeres individually getting shorter. So every time each sarcomere gets shorter, the overall thing is going to become shorter as well. So there are two kinds of main filaments here. With thick filaments called a myosin, and then thin filament consists of a couple of things. These are all on the slides, but I just want to show you a little bit, perhaps, of what they sort of look like, and then we're going to go from there. Okay, so the thick myosin looks like this. Okay, they're going to be right in the middle, crossing the lines like this. Okay, these are myosin. Let me try that one more time. Myosin, myosin, myosin. And then you have the more myosin here. Here we go. More myosin. And then we just got to draw a few more here. So these myosins actually have heads at the end. Okay. These heads are able to grab onto another protein, which I'll show you in a bit. Let me label it for you. These are myosin, aka thick filament. Okay, so they have heads that can grab and pull on actin. Okay, actins are the thin filament. We learned about actin like way back last semester in lecture 3. If you ever need to, refresh your memory on what they look like. But I mean, it's not important, I suppose. And the actin are like this, okay? The actins are going to be kind of sandwiched between the myosin. I'm going to draw more actin right here. We're going to have more actin here. Again, sandwiched over here. And this whole thing just kind of repeats for the entire length of the myofibrils. Okay. And then you can draw more, right? Like it doesn't end. It's like the entire, as long as the muscle cell is, the myofibril is going to be that long. So these are the actin. Okay, so that's the basic organization of the myofibril. Now, what happens? I'll write out for you, and but I'll go through the diagrams with you to kind of show you first. Okay, when we need to contract a muscle, calcium is going to be released. Okay, and the calcium, which will allow a few things to happen, I'll write down for you in a second. Ultimately, the release of calcium will allow the myosin over here to grab onto the actin. So this little head right here will grab onto the actin and it will pull in this direction. This head will also grab into the actin, onto the actin, and then it will pull in this direction. So basically, it will look like this. You don't have to draw this. You can just watch, and I'll show you a picture of it. Okay, so there is there is the myosin with a head, and then this is gonna be the actin, right, like this right now. Okay, so like it's like this piece right here, but I've drawn it bigger. So the head of the myosin will grab onto this actin, and then it will pull it. It will pull it. So basically, think of look at my camera here. My left hand here, these fingers would be like the actin and or myosin. Myosin, let's say left hand is myosin, and these are the actin. So it's like this. They're kind of like sandwiched between each other. But when the myosin pulls on the actin, it basically causes the overlap to increase. Okay? And that's how the sarcomere is going to get shortened. Remember, the whole sarcomere is really long. Sorry, the whole myofibril is really long with multiple sarcomeres connected end to end. So when all the sarcomeres get shorter, the entire muscle will ultimately get shorter. But it depends on the head grabbing on the actin, right? Remember, before it's like this, right? But once you want to contract it, it grabs on, the mouse and head grabs on, and then it pulls. It pulls, pulls, and it causes the entire sarcomere to shorten. If you have trouble visualizing it, there are videos on Luminate that you can watch. But let me show you the picture here. I'll come back to this in a second. But over here, right, you can see once again the darker ones. That's the myosin. Okay, and there are multiple heads. I only drew one because it's easier. And then these red ones, these are the actin. Never mind the A band, I band, H zone, Z line. Okay, you don't have to know them. It's like already very complicated, right? But once they pull on it, you can see the overlapping increases. Okay? So an important point to remember is individual filament do not change length. Right? The actin themselves don't get longer, shorter. The myosin don't get shorter, longer. But the amount of overlap changes to create contraction. Okay. Now, just to help you orient again a little bit, this right here, sorry, this right here, that's the sarcomere. Okay? And when they're contracting here, you see the amount of overlap increases, which means afterwards the sarcomere is a little bit shorter. There you go. Does anyone have any questions for me? Wonderful. Okay, I'm gonna go through this over here with you. But actually I will copy this over and give you some notes on it. Okay. You can write directly on your PowerPoint slides if you want. Okay, so first of all, this is like a zoomed in version of the actin. Yeah. So right here, this is the actin, and then it's like zoomed in. Actin, as I told you, we learned it last semester, lecture 3, are these two intertwined protein filaments. They are part of the cytoskeleton, and in this case, it makes up your muscles. And on the actin, I don't know. I guess you can kind of see it. These little black balls right here. It's more obvious on the other side. Okay, these black balls, they are myosin binding site. In other words, when the myosin, in case you forgot, this is the myosin, and then this is the myosin head. That's what it's called. Myosin head. They want to grab onto the actin and pull, but they can't just grab on it anywhere. They have to grab on the actin at these myosin binding sites. But normally, the myosin binding sites are covered by these green fibers, okay, shown here as these like little ribbons. They are called triple myosin. Okay, so triple myosin covers the myosin binding sites when the muscle is at rest. When you're not contracting the muscle, we are going to cover up all the binding sites so there's nothing to grab on, which is fine. You don't want them to grab and pull. You want it to just be relaxed. You're not doing anything to the muscle at the moment. Okay, so just copy that down. And then on the triple myosin, there are these additional protein called troponin. Troponin controls the positioning of triple myosin. It's kind of like a switch that controls it. Incidentally, troponin is what they would check in your blood to see if a person has suffered from a heart attack recently. Okay, if someone survives a heart attack, the level of troponin is going to be abnormally high in their blood. And if you're interested in why, you can look it up. We're not going to talk about it now. Okay, so what happens is when we want to contract the muscle, calcium will be released. I'll tell you where the calcium comes from in a second. Calcium will be released. Actually, I told you last class, the calcium are stored in the sarcoplasmic reticulum. Okay, but like I will tell you more about it in a bit. Just want to show you though. And we roll it down right here. Okay, the myofibrils, which is where the sarcomeres are, they are wrapped around by these endoplasmic reticulum or sarcoplasmic reticulum as they're called in muscle. And that's where the calcium are going to be stored. Okay? And then there are these T tubules that will be carrying down the action potential to trigger the release of these calcium. Okay? But the point I'm trying to make here is once the calcium are released, the calcium binds to the troponin. Okay? And once the calcium binds to the troponin, it will roll away the triple myosin, which then expose these binding sites for the myosin head. Okay, so once you roll it away, it's like a magnet. The myosin head will grab, and then it's gonna pull, and then it's gonna shorten the sarcomere. Okay. Now let's take a closer look at this. This is called the sliding filament theory. Okay. Basically, I'll read it to you. It's pretty straightforward. The myosin head at the beginning, okay, for this to happen, the myosin head splits ATP and become reoriented and energized. Okay, so of course, this requires um, energy input, right? So that's where the ATP goes in the body for muscle contractions. So the myosin head kind of, cocks into position and it's ready to grab onto the actin. Then the next thing it will do is it will grab onto the actin and then it will pull and then it will actually let go and then grab onto the next site. Okay. It's kind of hard to tell from the picture, I guess. Let me try to show you with the arm, okay? So this is the myosin head, okay? It's gonna grab and then it's gonna pull it over, but then I'm gonna let go and the ATP helps me let go and readjust the arm so that I can grab onto the next site and then pull more. Then let go and then pull more. Let go and pull more. Okay. But the actin is like it's a almost like a spring. Okay. So again, it's really hard to show it like this. So this is the actin and then this is the myosin. Okay. So basically grabs and then pull and then let go and then grasp more and then pull, right? But what happens is when the myosin let go, so grabs, pull, and then when it let goes, the actin actually starts sliding back to its original position. So it must grab and pull again, right? So again, it's going to keep on sliding back, sliding back. So you have to keep on pulling and pulling and pulling. And this continuous pulling is going to create the contraction, which is why you get tired. Okay. Like if I'm holding something heavy, like you get tired over time because it's not like you grab and pull and then you just hang on, right? You actually, the myosin head has to keep on grabbing, let go, and then grab, pull, let go, grab, pull, that keeps on doing it to sustain the kind of contraction. And while this is happening, you are burning ATP, all right? And if you're not able to supply adequate amount of ATP, then your muscle gets tired out, right? Basically. So that's the sliding filament theory. Without ATP, the myosin would grab, pull, but then it can't let go. Okay, the ATP is there to trigger the let go and readjust the position. Right? But without ATP, it grabs and it won't let go. Then the muscle stiffens, right? You might have heard of rigor mortis. When a person passes away, they stiffen up um, because of this reason. Okay, that's that. Muscle contraction. I'll show you the notes first. Actually, I'll probably just write it here. First of all, we have, let's say you voluntarily want to move some parts of the body. That comes from your primary motor cortex. And then it will travel down the spinal cord, exit through the motor neuron. And the motor neuron, if the effector is a muscle, a single motor neuron is actually going to be connecting with multiple muscle fibers. Okay, so let me write down for you. One single motor neuron can control a whole group of muscle fiber. Okay. I mean, it depends on what kind of muscle you're talking about. We don't have fine control of all the muscles. Fingers, very dexterous, right? Probably the ratio between motor neurons and muscle fiber is really low. Okay. In other words, one motor neuron is not going to be controlling a whole bunch of muscles in the fingers because that would lack individual fine motor control, right? It's not very dexterous. But if we're talking about like a muscle in the calf, right, where it's usually very explosive type of power, imagine like running, right, sprinting, and you don't need fine control over there. So you might have a single motor neuron uh, controlling a much bigger muscle mass. Okay, so the ratio is going to be higher. Higher means like one motor neuron to many many fibers as opposed to one to very few. So then the action potential is going to come down. And we have what's called a neuromuscular junction. It's basically like this. This is the motor neuron axon terminal, axon terminal of motor neuron. And then instead of having like a dendrite, in this case, we would have the muscle. Okay, the muscle right here, muscle fiber, which is a muscle cell, right? So this here, this is called the neuromuscular junction. It's like a synapse, but synapse is for neuron. This is for neuron and muscle. And I told you before, on the surface of the muscle fiber, we have these holes which are connected to the T tubules. So basically, when the neurotransmitter gets released, and the neurotransmitter is actually acetylcholine neurotransmitter, is something called acetylcholine, okay, or ACH for short. These acetylcholine will trigger action potential down the T tubules, okay, which will spread into the sarcoplasmic reticulum, and that will trigger the release of calcium. Okay, and just to remind you, what will the calcium do? Calcium binds to troponin, okay, and then with the calcium, the troponin rolls away the tropomyosin, and then that will expose the myosin binding site, right? Expose myosin binding site on actin, and then myosin grabs and pull on actin. And that creates muscle contraction. Creates muscle contraction. Let me just copy this over to the notes so that you have it. There you go. Okay, copy what you need, ask what you want, and then we're gonna move on. Okay. Just gonna go through a few disorder with you and wrap up the lesson. Motor neuron disorders. So there are a couple of conditions that could cause the degeneration of motor neuron. Some are caused by viruses, some are caused by autoimmune disorders. So polio is a virus that infects and kill motor neurons. And at worst, Oh, there's a question. What's the difference between muscle cell and myofibril? Yeah, good question. A muscle cell contains myofibril. Okay, so the muscle cell is this whole thing, and in the cytoplasm of the muscle cell, in the cytoplasm of the muscle fiber, you have multiple myofibrils. Okay, so muscle cell, the entire cell is cylindrical, and then you have all these myofibrils in there. Okay, if you pull one of them out, it's gonna look like that. Does that answer your question? Good. Um, and so at worst, it will cause death. And it happens because the motor neurons that's controlling breathing, for example, if those get destroyed by the virus, then you no longer have a connection between the brain and the breathing muscle, and you can't breathe, and that can cause death, right? And in some cases, if it doesn't kill the person, it will cause paralysis. Okay? So mainly affects children under 5 years of age, and 1 in 200 infections can lead to irreversible paralysis. Okay, and then again, oh, I already mentioned this point, right? Like 5 to 10% died because the breathing muscles becomes immobilized. Polio is preventable with vaccines, and you guys probably know who Bill Gates is, right? So he and his ex-wife Melinda Gates, they have a foundation called the Melinda Gates Foundation, and one of their goals is to help eradicate polio through vaccinations. And the efforts were actually pretty good. They were very close to completely eradicating the disease, except for like small pockets of cases that still exist. But it's primarily due to like access to the uh, to the vaccines in some very remote location. Because the vaccines, like you need to deliver it to the place, and then not everybody, is comfortable getting the vaccines, right? As you know, there is a lot of pushback with vaccinations nowadays. And let me just give you some stats here. It says in 1988, when the program was launched, the program to eradicate means completely get rid of the disease, right? We only done it to smallpox, right? One disease. So in 1988, which is like a long time ago, right? Like almost 40 years ago, there were polio in more than 125 countries, and paralyzing 1,000 children per day. But with immunization, okay, that has reached 3 billion children. Since then, the incidence of polio has decreased by 99%. Okay. So right now, the only places where you still find polio, according to the stats I have here, are in Afghanistan and Pakistan. And if they're able to do large scale vaccination there, then it's possible we will see polio's eradicated. But like I said, there's a lot of anti-vaccine movement. You hear about measles, right, popping out recently in Canada and in the States, and that once again is because of people's hesitancy in getting vaccines for themselves and for their kids in some cases. Do you guys know who this is? Anybody recognize this person?
Is there Stephen Hawking? So
Yes, yeah, very good.
yeah.
That's Stephen
Hmm.
Hawkins. He's a very famous physicist, and he was diagnosed with ALS, which is called amyotrophic lateral sclerosis. He was diagnosed at a very young age, and the doctor said he wouldn't live for more than 3 or 5 years. But then he only recently passed away. Okay, at I think like 70 something. I don't quite remember exactly, but you can look it up. But throughout his life, he slowly, progressively lose mobility because in ALS, it is autoimmune disorder where your body attacks the motor neurons. And so, it slowly takes away your body to control the body uh, movement. So he ultimately was only able to control like a small muscle in his cheek, and that's how he control his wheelchair, just with the muscle in the cheek. And he has a machine that he types into, and then it's able to basically create speech for him. Um, I don't know if you guys remember, like this is almost 10 years ago. I think 10 years ago they had a ice bucket challenge. I don't know if you remember seeing that on the social media, where people dump buckets of ice on themselves and then raise money to help uh, get fundings for research in ALS, and actually Centennial, the president at the time, participated in that, and there was quite a successful uh, fundraising campaign. Yeah, oh, this was it, right? It raised that $220 million worldwide. Uh, this was oh yeah, more than 10 years ago now, like 11 years ago. Anyways, botulism. Botulism. Some bacteria make deadly toxins that could interfere with the communication between the nerves and the muscles. One such bacteria is the Clostridium botulinum, okay, uh, which causes botulism. You cannot prevent the poisoning by cooking your food because it's not like cooking the food would kill the bacteria, but the toxin will still be there. And people sometimes receive these Botox injection, and Botox is the injection. The active ingredient is basically the toxin taken from the bacteria. Okay, and what it does is the toxin prevents motor neuron from releasing acetylcholine. And in the notes I just gave you, you can see the acetylcholine is the key neurotransmitter for communication between your motor neurons and the muscle fibers. So if you block acetylcholine, then you basically become paralyzed, right? You cannot move that muscle, right? There's no more communication between your neurons and the muscle fibers. When you use it in low dose, what happens is it causes the muscle to basically become paralyzed in the face and relax. And then when your face is kind of relaxed, then your wrinkles go away, right? Because like, yeah, I mean, you look at my forehead, there's no wrinkle, but then like if I move my forehead, then all the wrinkles shows up. Same as those like I think they're called crow's feet at the corner of the eye, right? They only show up when you move the muscle. And basically, that's what the Botox is. It causes paralysis of the face at a very mild level. But if a person ingests a significant amount of the toxin from contaminated food, um, then they could die from botulism. There's an other bacteria in the Clostridium family. It's called Clostridium tetani, and that can cause tetanus. Okay, this is an anaerobic bacteria. They live in um, environment that doesn't require oxygen. Sometimes you hear people say if you get cut by rusted nail in the soil or something, right? Or like a fence, scrape you, you gotta go and get your tetanus shot. Okay. Typically we have tetanus shot already, and they're good for 10, 20 years. But if you get a fresh cut just to be safe, you should update your tetanus shot. Okay, that's what they look like under the microscope. These are bacteria, okay? They're not viruses. And in this case, the tetanus prevents the spinal cord from releasing inhibitory neurotransmitters, okay, resulting in muscle stiffening and cannot be released from contraction. So what that means is the spinal cord has these inhibitory neurotransmitters that would allows mm, uh, we can say these are like anti-contraction because they're inhibitory, right? They kind of block the acetylcholine, basically. Right? You don't want to have acetylcholine all the time. For example, if I want to contract my arm, the bicep needs to contract, but the tricep needs to relax. right? So like I need to block the acetylcholine in the tricep. But what happens in the case of tetanus is the toxin prevents the relaxation of these muscles. And if nothing is relaxed, if both the biceps and the triceps cannot relax, then my arm is locked. It can't go one way or the other because the muscle is fighting with each other, right? And that's what tetanus is. You cannot relax. This is a very famous painting. You search tetanus picture online, you almost always gonna get this picture. Okay, this is a painting in the 1809, 1809 painting of a soldier who was fighting in the war because they get infected with tetanus. There was trench wars back then, right? They spent a lot of time in soil, and then their feet might get wet and then start to have wounds, and then that gives opportunity for bacteria to go in. And then the person, you can see here, it's like just really, really stiff and contracted all over. And then if you can't relax the muscle, uh, eventually it could lead to death. It happened to people's pets as well. Some student told me their dog got tetanus by cuts from the outdoor, and the same thing with the dogs. They can't relax. Last part here, we're gonna talk a little bit about two kinds of muscles. We have slow twitch muscle and fast twitch muscle. So each of your muscle, bicep, your pecs, right? Your pectoralis major, they're called your shoulder muscle, trapezius, all these muscles has different kinds of muscle fibers in it, okay? Depending on the function of the muscle, they might have higher percentage of slow twitch fibers, or they might have higher percentage of fast twitch fibers. And you can actually do training to increase the ratio of one type versus the other. I'll tell you more about it in a second, okay? But first, slow twitch fibers, as the name implies, they do not really produce explosive type of forces. Okay, they are relatively slow in the contraction, and in doing so, they can actually um, sustain contraction for a very long time without getting tired. Okay. And these low twitch fibers are actually darker in color because of a special kind of oxygen delivering protein called myoglobin. Okay. So the myoglobin is more efficient in delivering oxygen. And if you can continuously deliver a good amount of oxygen to these muscles, then they don't get tired easily. Okay. So postural muscles typically would have a higher percentage of slow twitch fibers. Okay. Like you can stand or sit for a reasonable amount of time without getting too tired. Okay, like I can sit here all like teach for 3 hours. I'll be okay. Like my back's not gonna like be killing me. Okay. But if I try to, fast walk or run for 3 hours, then like I don't even think I can finish that, right? That's because the muscles in the legs for running, they are not um made up of slow twitch fibers. Okay, they cannot sustain these kind of endurance type uh, of uh, of of um, of activities unless you train yourself to do it. Okay, so when we eat like red meat, dark meat, and white meat, that's what we're talking about. Okay, when we eat dark meat, we are eating muscles that have high percentage of slow twitch fibers. So, if you think about it, like a cow, I've never really seen a cow run. Okay, they just kind of stand there and graze all day. So, their muscles are mostly not for explosive type of actions, right? For the salmon, which is also dark meat, red color in color, because salmon has to swim against the current all the time, right? Okay, and they can't get tired. If they get tired, they just get washed off, right? So to constantly fight it, you need to have muscle that allows you to have endurance and do so without getting tired. What's chicken breast? Do you know what is chicken breast dark meat or white meat, huh? Anybody? No, nobody know chicken breast? Yeah, chicken breast is white meat, okay? Chicken breast is supposed to be healthier, okay? This here is a duck meat. Okay, duck breast. Duck breast. Duck breast is dark meat. Chicken breast is white meat. Okay, that's why a duck can fly, but a chicken cannot fly. Okay. To fly, you need to be able to flap the wings consistently using the chest muscles, and you can't get tired. You better be able to keep on flapping, right? So you need slow twitch muscle fibers for that. Okay. Fast twitch, on the other hand, is good for fast, rapid, explosive type of muscle, okay, like jumping all of a sudden to catch a ball, sprinting to catch a bus, right? And the chickens, again, like you see a chicken, you try to catch them, they flap their wings, and then they get out of the way, but then they get tired right away. So they could do these flaps a couple of times, quick bursts of energy, but it's not strong enough to sustain a flight. Okay, fish like tilapia or things like that, they could dash out of the way if a predator comes, right? But they cannot swim at really, really high speed for long periods of time. So if a person is training to be a sprinter, their running muscles would have more fast twitch fibers. Whereas if a person is trying to run a marathon, then the fast twitch fibers will slowly, convert to slow twitch fibers, and over time you would have more of this type instead. And that is almost, oh yeah, that almost it. Okay, this is just to show you, long distance running, you will have more slow twitch, more red muscle, and then if you are doing sprinting, then it will switch. So it's not, fixed. It's something that your body can adapt to and modify as needed. Okay, which protein covers binding sites on actin? I'm just going to tell you the answer. It would be the tropomyosin. Tropomyosin. The troponin controls the tropomyosin. Okay. Answer is B. And last one here. Which neurotransmitter is needed for muscle contraction? Is is acetylcholine. Acetylcholine. That's all. It's a very long lecture, lecture 10, with the bones and the muscles and stuff like that. So make sure you spend the time to go through it and learn it properly to prepare for, of course, your final test. We only have two more weeks and two more things to go through. We have reproductive, which is very short, and the lecture 12, which is endocrine. So that's a little bit harder. But one more lab to go and one more final test. Let me bring up the reproductive system here, and we're going to do that. Okay, reproductive system. Like I said, very short lecture. Only 20 slides here. We might be able to do most of it today. We'll see. First, we're gonna start with the female reproductive system. That's the more complicated one with all the hormones that we have to go through. And then the male is relatively straightforward. So let's start with labeling. Okay. So we have the female reproductive system in the study guide. Let me see, that's the guy. This is the female. Okay, let's do the female one. What is the best way to study the lecture that we just did? Uh, like I said, right? I personally find it helpful to draw it out. But with all the new terms and everything, maybe do the fill in the blanks couple times in the lecture, in the study guide. Okay, that will help you at least get the terms in your mind first. And the 3D models, of course, is going to be useful. right? Just pull up the 3D models on the Luminate and try to name the bones at least. Okay, and then with the pointers you can reveal the names as well, right? But the key thing is to start early, okay? Don't wait until the end. It's lecture 12 is a lot of materials to memorize. So start with 10 this week, get all the bones and stuff out of the way before the big one comes. Okay, so here we go. This is the mid sagittal section of the female reproductive system. This is the back right here, and this is the front. Okay, and you might remember this here. You might not. I don't really know. Right here, this is the symphysis pubis, and let me just go back to show you over here. Is it this one? I think it's this one. Right here. The pelvis right here. You see? The pubis bone. This is the pelvic girdle, right? Pelvis bone right here at the front. That is the symphysis pubis. It's like a bit of a cartilage bone that allows the two pubis bone to fuse together. So if you cut it right in the middle, create a mid-sagittal section, that's what this is. Okay, symphysis pubis. I can write it here for you. The pubis bone connect here. All right. What do we have? Well, let's start with um, the female gonad. Gonad is reproductive organs. And in this case, we have B, which is the ovary. Ovary. There are two ovaries, one on each side. And there are these almost hair-like structure right here. Okay, that's called a fimbriae. I know there's no lines there, but we can add our own. Which helps guide the egg. The egg comes from the ovary, right? Guide the egg towards the fallopian tube. Okay, and the fallopian tube is right here. There we go. What key events takes place in the fallopian tube? Does anybody know? Fallopian tube, also known as the oviduct. So what happens in the fallopian tube is that this is the site of fertilization, which is when the sperm will fertilize the egg. If fertilization occurs elsewhere other than the fallopian tube, then it might cause the egg to implant somewhere else other than the uterus, and that can lead to what's called ectopic pregnancy. And that is a dangerous situation that requires immediate medical attention. Because then the baby would be growing elsewhere, right, in the reproductive tract, and that could cause quite a bit of damage. Okay, So where is the baby supposed to grow? Well, it's supposed to grow in this um, right here, and that is the uterus. The uterus is the womb, you can say, the womb. Okay, where the baby grows. It's a very muscular structure. And there's a really, really thick muscle right here. Okay. And the muscle itself is called the myometrium. Myometrium. It is the uterus muscle, basically. And when do you want the muscle to contract in the uterus? What's the reason for muscle contraction in the uterus? That's right, childbirth. Okay, contraction needed for giving birth. Okay, for labor, induce the labor, and then eventually birth. And there's a hormone that trigger all these. It's called oxytocin. It's released from the pituitary gland. We'll learn about that later. The inside of the uterus has a blood vessel lining, and this lining is called the endometrium. Endometrium. It is the lining of the uterus. The thickness is under the influence of estrogen and progesterone. Okay. So during the monthly cycles, the levels of estrogen and progesterone will rise and drop, and these hormones is going to trigger development of blood vessels in the endometrium, causing the linings to become thicker or thinner depending on the levels. So we'll learn about that later. But basically, the blood vessels are there to help sustain the growth of the baby, should there be a pregnancy. Now, this portion right here of the uterus is called the fundus. The fundus is kind of, you can think of it as like the body of the uterus, the top portion, okay, of it. And down here, this neck area, that is called the cervix. Cervix. If the baby is growing, there's going to be a pluck right here that will seal the cervix area, so nothing goes in, nothing comes out. Now, as the baby grows, I'm sure you can imagine, or you might have had experience of this. It gets very heavy, and the uterus is gonna basically like lower, right, because of the weight of the baby. So we don't want that to lower too much. That's why there is a like a ligament here to help hold it in place. This is called the round ligament. Okay, round ligament is basically to support. support the uterus as it gets heavier with the baby inside. All right. Underneath the uterus is the urinary bladder, which is this whole thing right here. So what is this then? This black line that I'm drawing. You should know that. You had a quiz last week. That would be the urethra. Very good. There you go. Urethra. Okay. Over here, that's the vagina. This is the anus, just for reference. And this would be the rectum. Okay? Don't worry about the other ones. That's everything. Any questions? Okay, why don't we take an early break? We'll resume in 5 minutes. I'll leave this on in case you need to copy more. See you in a bit. Right, let's keep going. So, what else do I have? Let's see. Let's take a look at the ovary right here. The ovary is made up of two portions, just like many other organs. There is a outer region called the cortex, and then the inner region is called the medulla. And in this case, the cortex of the ovary contains many follicles. Okay? And follicles, basically, you can think of it as something that will become the egg. Okay, so the follicle contains an immature ovum called the oocyte. We learned about oocyte last semester. These are cells that will undergo meiosis to form an egg. Okay, so there are many follicles in the cortex, and a female is born with all the follicles that they're ever going to have in their entire lives. Um, and by the time they reach puberty, even though they started with as many as 2 million, by the time they reach puberty, um, only a fraction of it would be left. But this is still more than enough, right, for the lifetime. And in each cycle after puberty, one egg, one follicle will develop into a fully mature egg. And we're going to learn about that process shortly. Because the woman is born with all the eggs that are going to have, the quality of the DNA in those eggs might deteriorate over time. We learned about non-disjunction last semester, where DNA fails to separate in meiosis, and that could lead to additional chromosomes in the egg, and that the risk of that happening actually increases as the age of the woman increase as well. So people who decided to have kids later on in life, the risk of having trisomy is substantially higher compared to earlier on in life. We talked about all these things already. You can just read it over. I'm not gonna go through it again. It's pretty much what we wrote on the notes. And we are gonna do the hormonal regulation of the menstrual cycle right now. So this is probably the most complicated portion of the notes of the lecture. But once you understand it, you should be okay. So new paper, please. And we're gonna say hormonal regulation of the menstrual cycle. Just give me 1 second. Sorry, I'm just replying to an email here. Okay. Um, so let's take a look here first. Um, let's draw the ovary. Okay, so here is the ovary. Ovary. And you know, technically, like it's gonna look like this with the connection, but I'm gonna make it simpler here. We'll just say this is the fallopian tube right here. There. And I know the length of the cycle varies from person to person, but for our discussion, we would just assume is a 28-day cycle. So during the first half of the cycle, um, it is called the follicular phase. And so right here, for the first half of the cycle, this is called the follicular phase, which is day 1 to 14, okay? Assuming a 28-day cycle, day 1 to day 14. So during this follicular phase, this would be a follicle. A follicle contains an immature egg, as the PowerPoint slides told you. And during the follicular phase, the first half of the cycle, the follicle is going to develop, and the egg inside is going to mature. Okay. So follicular phase, maturation of the egg inside the follicle. Okay. One follicle will be chosen and it will develop. As this is happening, as the follicle develops, it is going to be releasing a hormone, and that hormone is estrogen. I'll tell you what it does in a bit, but that's the key thing to know for now. And at day 14, what happens is the egg is now mature and it will get released into the fallopian tube. This is called ovulation. Ovulation. And after ovulation, there are some leftover materials from the follicle. The egg gets released, but there is still some leftover tissue. Okay, so this leftover tissue from the follicle develops into corp develops into a structure called corpus. Corpus is a bundle, right? Corpus luteum. Okay. So this is going to be the second half of the cycle. We call it the luteophase. So assuming a 28-day cycle, it will be the latter half, the luteophase. So this corpus luteum is going to grow. Okay, and if there is no pregnancy, then eventually it will break down. Okay, it will be gone. This is the corpus luteum, and what the corpus luteum produces is an other hormone. Okay, and that other hormone is progesterone. Progesterone. Okay, so that's the background information. I'm gonna tell you more in just a bit, but anything you want to ask? No, everything's good. All right, fantastic. Let's move on. So we're gonna start another note for a moment, and then we're gonna come back to it. Okay. Relationship between hypothalamus and pituitary gland. Okay, this is an important relationship that will come back again and again. So let's draw a picture of it. There we go. So this is the hypothalamus, the master gland, and dangling from below is the pituitary gland, but the pituitary gland is separated into two parts. We have the anterior pituitary, and we have the posterior pituitary. Right here. Now, there are two kinds of neurons in the hypothalamus. Okay? Some neurons, and we briefly talked about this before, some neurons have the body in the hypothalamus, but then their axon extends all the way into the posterior pituitary gland. So some hormones, e.g., ADH, we learned that last time. And there's a new one called oxytocin, which I briefly told you about it before the break. It triggers labor um, in females. It causes the uterus to contract. So some hormones are produced in the hypothalamus. All these are important, okay? They're not filler information. You need to know this for the final test, okay? Which is going to come back again in some of these things are going to come back in lecture 12 as well. So some hormones are produced in the hypothalamus and stored and released from the posterior pituitary. Okay, so there is like a heart-line connection, physical connection between the hypothalamus and the pituitary gland. Okay. Like my headphone here, it's physically connected to the computer with the wire. Okay, that's the relationship between the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland. The neurons extend their axon into it, physical connection. Now there is another group of neurons right here in the hypothalamus, but these ones, their their axons don't extend all the way to the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, but these neurons, they secrete releasing hormones and inhibiting hormones to regulate the release we can say to regulate anterior pituitary hormone. So the anterior pituitary gland makes its own hormone. Right? I'll give you a few. There are two that we are interested in for the reproductive system. There's something called FSH, okay, which is follicle stimulating hormone. And then there's something called LH, which is luteinizing hormone. And to regulate the control of the release of FSH and LH from the anterior pituitary gland, the hypothalamus would be releasing green light hormone, okay, releasing hormones, or red light hormones, inhibiting hormone. So the releasing hormone would be the permission for the AP, for the anterior pituitary gland to release FSH and LH. The inhibiting hormone would stop it. So again, the hypothalamus and the posterior pituitary gland, they are physically connected through neurons, okay? Like my headphone is physically connected to my computer with the wire. Whereas the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland, even though there's no physical connection, so like my mouse, I don't have a direct physical line connecting it to my computer, but I can still control my computer with my mouse through like Wi-Fi, right? So that's kind of what happens here, right? There is like a remote control between the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland instead of through like Wi-Fi signal, Bluetooth signal rather, not Wi-Fi, Bluetooth signal. It's communicating it through hormonal signals. Okay, so there is actually a capillary network here. You don't have to draw this if it gets too messy. Okay, there's a capillary network here that will carry the hormones very quickly to the anterior pituitary gland. Okay, so this is called like a portal network. Don't worry too much about it right now. The key thing to know is when the hypothalamus release these releasing hormones or inhibiting hormone, it gets to the anterior pituitary gland very quickly through this portal system, this capillary system. Okay? So that's the relationship. So now I am going to connect everything we've mentioned here with everything we mentioned here. Before I do that, anything you want me to clarify? Okay. So let's go through the hormonal regulation Let me see. So at the beginning, right, of the beginning of the cycle, uh, like what event marks the beginning of a new cycle? That would be the menstrual bleeding. Menstrual bleeding. Okay, so that is the beginning of a new cycle. Okay, the bleeding is actually coming from the shedding of the endometrium, which will come back in a bit, okay? Shedding of endometrium. Endometrium is the lining of the uterus. It's where all the blood vessels are uh, to sustain the growth of the baby, right? Should there be a pregnancy. So what happens is, following the shedding of the endometrium, the next event that will take place is that the hypothalamus releases GnRH, which I'll write in green, GnRH. So GnRH stands for gonadotropin releasing hormone. Okay? Sometimes it's good to memorize the full name because it kind of tells you what it does. So it's a releasing hormone. Anything that ends with releasing hormone, we know it comes from the hypothalamus. You'll be learning a few releasing hormones in the classes to come. And it's a green light. It gives permission to the anterior pituitary gland to, release other hormones. And so this particular releasing hormone, it's gonadotropin. Gonado is talking about the gonads, okay? In this case, ovaries. Tropin means it's affecting it, okay? Affecting it, attracted to it. So the hypothalamus is going to release the GnRH, which is going to, in the first half of the cycle, is going to tell the anterior pituitary gland, I'm just going to put AP, releases FSH, follicle stimulating hormone, and a little bit of LH. Not a lot in this case. There's going to be LH, but that's not like the significant one that we're focusing on. So I'm going to put it a little bit smaller. Okay, so the one event leads to the next. The anterior pituitary gland will release the follicle stimulating hormone. That's what FSH stands for. Before you wonder, men also has it, okay? Men also have follicle stimulating hormone, but it does a different thing. There is the FSH. Now, what do you think follicle stimulating hormone does? And that's why I said it's important to kind of know what they stand for because the name sort of tells you what the function of the hormone is. So follicle stimulating hormone is going to go and stimulate a follicle. Right, so FSH is going to be released from the anterior pituitary gland. It's going to travel through the bloodstream. It's going to get to the ovary. And when it gets to the ovary, it will stimulate the follicle to develop. And so as the follicle develops, right, the egg matures and it will be pumping out estrogen. So that's what happens next. Okay. The LH is not doing much at this point. Again, we're just doing a simplified version of this thing. So what happens is the travels to ovaries. Okay, FSH stimulate follicle development in the ovary. In the ovary. And as this is happening, the ovary releases estrogen. Yeah. This is the follicular phase, right? First half of the cycle. What does the estrogen do? Well, estrogen is going to do two things. Number one, it will thickens the endometrium by stimulating blood vessel formation. It thickens the endometrium by stimulating blood vessel formation. And so the blood vessels from the last cycle, they all shed at the beginning of this cycle, and now you're going to form new ones. Okay, in anticipation of pregnancy. Okay, in case there is going to be a pregnancy, we need to have all these new blood vessels, all these blood vessels to help sustain the baby's growth. The second thing it does is it actually goes back to the estrogen, goes back to the anterior pituitary gland, and it goes to the hypothalamus, and we call this a positive feedback. Positive feedback, which is the opposite of negative feedback. Okay, let me just explain this briefly. Um, a negative feedback is what happens in 90% of the body regulation. If you get too cold, your body warms you up. If you get too hot, your body cools you down. This is a negative feedback. The trigger, the stimulus, is going to cause a bunch of events that opposes the trigger. Okay, think about RAS. Okay? Your blood pressure goes down. Your blood pressure goes down, and then you do all these things to bring it back up. That's called negative feedback. Okay. Uh, think about calcitonin. Your calcium level goes up, calcitonin brings it back down. It's the opposite. Negative feedback. That's called negative feedback. Most of the processes in the body relies on negative feedback to maintain homeostasis. But there are a few examples where your body uses positive feedback. So the trigger will cause a series of events. Instead of counteracting it, it will exaggerate it. Okay, it will intensify it. Right. So an example of that is over here with estrogen. And so we triggered the whole thing started with GnRH and then the FSH and the LH, and then it gets to estrogen. So with estrogen, you want to intensify the original trigger. You want to make more GnRH and stimulate the anterior pituitary gland to release more. So this is the second round now. Okay, second round. First half, day 1 to 14, estrogen, and then it goes back to the hypothalamus through the bloodstream, and then it stimulates the AP, and this time the AP releases FSH, but it's less important now, so I'm going to write it smaller, and LH. Okay, in fact, there's going to be so much LH, right? We're going to have what's called an LH surge, okay, which is like a sudden, sharp increase of LH. And it is this LH surge that triggers ovulation. Triggers ovulation. There is like if people want to find out whether they're ovulating or not, they could buy an ovulation kit. And how the ovulation kit works is the person, I mean, generally speaking, women have an idea of roughly when the ovulation is happening, but then like if they want to pinpoint exactly what day it is, then they would need the ovulation kit to be more precise and close to the time of ovulation. Um, they would basically either pee on the stick that comes with the ovulation kit, or they could dip it in the urine sample. And the stick is actually antibody test that detects the amount of LH that is in the urine. Okay. And so, you do it for a few consecutive days, and then the test kit would compare the amount of LH with the sample of the previous day. And if all of a sudden there is a sharp rise in the LH, then the kid is going to tell you, you're ovulating. Basically, the egg is already in the fallopian tube. And so, this is important information for pregnancy planning, right? If you want to get pregnant or if you want to avoid pregnant, then this information would help you decide what to do next, right? So that's going to trigger the ovulation right here. And after ovulation, as I was trying to tell you, there's going to be some leftover materials, and that leftover stuff is going to become the corpus luteum. Okay, so the corpus luteum will stay there for around 2 weeks, and in the process, it will release progesterone. Okay, so this is ovulation and formation of you cannot read my writing right here. Formation of corpus luteum. And the corpus luteum, like I said, is going to release progesterone. Okay? And don't forget the corpus luteum is inside the ovary. So we'll say ovary releases progesterone. Now, the progesterone will do two things. Um, Remember, what's thickening the endometrium is the estrogen, and the estrogen came from the developing follicle. But the follicle is gone by this point now. Okay? Once you release the egg, the follicle is no more, and it has becomes this corpus luteum. So we don't have estrogen anymore. Okay? So we need something else to sustain and further thicken the endometrium, and that would be the progesterone. And so it would further thickens the endometrium by stimulating the blood vessel formation. And in addition, what the progesterone will do is we already have the egg in the fallopian tube. We don't need to have another egg at the moment. There's no need to develop another follicle. So it's going to basically go back and it's going to have a negative feedback. Okay, remember, like blunt end arrows means inhibition. It's a is the universal symbol here. So it's going to go and say, don't produce any more GnRH at the moment, okay? And it's going to go to the anterior pituitary gland and say, don't produce any more FSH and LH at the moment. I don't need another follicle to develop. I already have an egg in the fallopian tube. Okay, let's wait and see what happens. Let's see if there's going to be fertilization, and then we'll decide whether we need another egg. Okay, so this is going to be negative feedback. So first half of the cycle, we have the positive feedback basically from the estrogen leading up to the event of ovulation. And then second half, we have the progesterone, which is doing the negative feedback to basically inhibit the development of another egg. Okay, so this second half here, this portion is the luteal phase. Luteal phase. Okay. Do you understand? I mean, there's a lot of moving parts here. But like, is the story coming together for you? Like anything you want me to clarify for you at all? Why the positive feedback produces more? No, both is gonna be produced, but like LH is the dominating one in this case. Okay, it's the one that we're focusing on. That's why I draw it like bigger here, right? Okay, and it is the LH that we need to trigger the ovulation. Okay, the FSH at this point is not doing much. We remember the main role of FSH is to develop a follicle. We just finished developing one, so at this point it's not really needed. Okay, it's gonna be there, but it's not gonna be playing a significant role. All right, I am going to fill in another chart with you to help you really put everything into perspective. So you will see a lot of these charts, here and there. Uh, they might look slightly different, depending on depending on the textbook you're looking at, but they convey the same information. Okay, so just give me a moment. I'm gonna copy it here. There we go. I need to copy one more. Okay. So there are four graphs here. Each line represents a hormone, and I guess it's hard for you to tell which one is which, but like I'm gonna go through it with you, and hopefully it's going to make sense. Okay. So first of all, uh, we have again the typical 28 days, and over here the first half. What do we call the first half again? Just checking to see if you remember the name. What is the first half here? What phase is that? Yeah, first half is the follicular phase, is where the follicle is going to be developing. And then here we have the luteal phase, dominated by the presence of the corpus luteum right there. And so at the beginning, you're gonna have this right here. Uh, I figure out how to fix this problem without having to restart. There we go. So this graph right here, right? Like there's some up and downs. Don't worry about too much about what goes up, what goes down necessarily, but like just focus on the big picture here. All right, so this is the FSH, follicle stimulating hormone. And so at the beginning there's a little bit of a increase here, and what's really important to realize is with the FSH increasing, don't worry about the dip here. Okay, it's not too important. With the increase of FSH, the follicle is going to be developing. This is development of follicle. And what hormone comes out as the follicle is developing? Well, if you have been paying attention, you would know it is the estrogen. So look, this is the estrogen line. It goes up. It goes up. Okay. So increase FSH leads to increase in estrogen. I'm just gonna put E here, okay? And so this blue line That is the estrogen. And so if you check the estrogen level in the first half of the cycle, it should be higher than the second half. And more importantly, this here is the endometrium. The endometrium. At the beginning, there's the menstrual flow. So all the blood vessels from the previous cycle shed, but then it's going to build up again. It's going to get thicker and thicker and thicker because of the estrogen of the first half of the cycle. Right? And then it's going to peak. The estrogen is going to peak when the follicle is, um, fully mature. And then here we have the estrogen peak. And what comes after the estrogen peak? Well, after the estrogen peak, remember the estrogen is going to have positive feedback to the hypothalamus and the anterior pituitary gland, and it's going to tell it to release more GnRH and more FSH and LH. So this is the LH surge that I was talking about following the peak of the estrogen. You're gonna have a peak of FSH as well, but like I said, that's not really doing much at this point. Okay, so the LH surge, and what event's gonna come after LH surge? Following LH surge, just look at the chart, you will see it is ovulation. Okay, so there is the egg, ovulation. And then this thing here, this thing, that's like leftover tissue, that's the corpus luteum. And at this point, you can see there's a decline in estrogen. Okay, the ovary is not really producing much estrogen anymore. The follicle is not there. Okay, you're still producing some estrogen. Okay, like again, we're oversimplifying things here, right? There are other places you can produce estrogen in the ovary, not just the follicle. Okay, but the follicle is gone, so estrogen goes down. But now, then the other hormone is going to take over. And that hormone was not there in the first half because there was no corpus luteum, pardon me. And then now, after ovulation, the corpus luteum is going to form and it's going to get really big. Okay, but if there's no pregnancy, then it breaks down. Right? So what happens is the amount of progesterone, right? This is like increase in progesterone along with the corpus luteum. And the progesterone will continue to thicken the endometrium. Okay. So at this point right here, you can see the drop. That's where the corpus luteum start to break down. Once you lose the corpus luteum, then the progesterone level goes down, and there's nothing sustaining the endometrium anymore. Not enough estrogen, progesterone's dropping. Then it's going to trigger the menstrual flow, right? The bleeding of the next cycle now, right? And over here, another key thing to know is increase in P, increase in progesterone actually lead to decrease in both LSH, LH, and FSH, right? Because of the negative feedback. We don't need another egg anymore. We don't need another follicle. So it's going to suppress the LH and the FSH. Okay. Last point. Once the corpus luteum breaks down, because there's no pregnancy, then the endometrium sheds. That's the first effect. But also, without the corpus luteum, you would have lower levels of progesterone as well. See, lower progesterone the progesterone level is gonna drop, right? Basically drop back down to very, very low. And without the progesterone, these negative feedback will no longer be there. It was the progesterone that's saying stop to the GnRH and to the AP, right? But once the progesterone level is gone, because the corpus luteum is no longer there, then we would essentially lift these negative feedback. And then the hypothalamus can release GnRH again, and then it begins the whole cycle all over again. Okay, so that's how it completes one full cycle. I know it's a lot of things, a lot of complicated relationship between the hormones and things like that. So, watch the recordings again, write out the relationship, do the flow chart couple times, right? You should be okay. Seriously, you guys are like super quiet. Anything at all that you want to ask before I wrap this up? No, everything is crystal clear. Well, you must have at least one question, right? Clear. Maybe you're wondering, so what happens if someone does get pregnant, right? What's gonna
Yeah,
happen? Well,
yeah,
that's
that was my question.
yeah, very good. Okay, so what happens if people get pregnant? Right? Like, how is this gonna be affected? First of all, um, if you don't already know, there's no period during pregnancy. Okay, and there is a little bit of change with what's going on here. So let me go back to the PowerPoint slides here to show you. Again, this is the same kind of information. It's nicer here because everything is all lined up and you can see how, with the estrogen increasing, the endometrium gets thickened, and then, there's a sharp drop after ovulation in estrogen because you no longer have the follicle, but then the progesterone takes over, so on and so forth. Okay, study the graph, talk to yourself, explain it to yourself, explain it to, someone in your family. Being able to explain a concept to someone is a clear sign that you understand the material. If you find yourself explaining this and then midway you're not sure what you're talking about anymore, then that means you have to go back and review some stuff. Okay. I If you don't have someone to explain this to, sometimes explaining it out loud to yourself actually is a good way to study these things as well. Okay. Now they use a little bit different names here, but follicular phase, luteal phase, you know, don't worry about these ones that we didn't talk about. Anyways, moving on. If fertilization occurs and it's followed by implantation, implantation is basically the zygote. Zygote is the fertilized egg, right? Implants into the endometrium. Okay, so if this happens, then the first thing that's gonna form is the placenta. The placenta, we learn about placenta in lecture 2, right? It's the thing that connects the baby and the mother. As the placenta it's developing, it produces a hormone called HCG, HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. Okay. This hormone will tell the corpus luteum to hold on a second. Don't break down yet. Okay. You can't break down now. If you break down, if the corpus luteum breaks down, we will lose the progesterone and we will lose the endometrium, and that's gonna negatively affect the baby. Okay. We need you to sustain the endometrium so that the baby can continue to grow, so that we can form the placenta. Okay, so don't break down just yet. Hang on a little bit longer. That's what the HCG will do. Eventually, when the placenta is fully formed, it will take over the job of the corpus luteum. Right? It will then supply its own progesterone and estrogen. Then we don't need the corpus luteum anymore. Okay? So with the HCG, it prolongs the life of the corpus luteum until the placenta can take over. And HCG levels will keep on rising at the beginning of pregnancy and continue to stay at a high level throughout pregnancy. So pregnancy kit test for the presence of HCG in the urine. Okay? If you have HCG in the urine and you're female, chances are you are pregnant. Right? There's a story I read where there is a like the guy pee on the pregnancy test stick of his girlfriend's just for fun. Because guys, they do weird stuff sometimes, and it was positive. Okay, puzzled by the result, he went to the doctor and see what happened, and it actually turns out if there are HCG in the urine of male, it's sometimes as a result of cancer developing. Okay, so I think it was testicular cancer in that case that causes the tissue to change in a way that produces HCG, and it was detectable in the urine. So you can Google that story if you want. It's a true story. All right, let's see if you learned anything at all. Okay, since you guys are so quiet and you had no questions, we'll finish this part and then I'll let you go. All right, go go go. Okay, not a lot of answers coming in, but that's okay. The correct one is the fallopian tube. That's where fertilization is going to be happening. Let's do the next one. Okay, thickening of the endometrium requires estrogen and progesterone. Okay, estrogen and progesterone are the most direct one that is going to be affecting the endometrium directly. Okay. There's a question. What happened at puberty to start the follicle to develop? Okay, yeah. So like at puberty, um, like where like how do you trigger this whole thing to happen for the first time, right? So as the body matures, so does the reproductive organs, right? And so at a certain age, it basically triggers certain genes to be switched on that previously were not switched on, and that kind of get the whole ball rolling. Okay, um, that's the short answer. Okay, good question. Okay, how about this? Only two of you are doing the polls. Maybe I'll just do the poll. I'll just tell you the answer. Okay, that's like it's not worth it. An increase in progesterone level will directly, the key word here is directly. What does it do when you have an increase in progesterone? So let's take a look at here. When you have increase in progesterone, it will
We can try
negatively.
first.
What's that?
We can try first, and after we can.
Sure,
Yeah,
sure. I'll let you try.
please.
Yeah, no problem. Here we go. Go ahead. Let me bring the question back now. All right, so let's see. Follow the flow chart and see what's gonna happen. Okay, so it will decrease FSH, and it will also decrease LH. Okay, and be directly, as in like the immediate thing that happens, right? It will also decrease GnRH because of the negative feedback I was telling you about. Okay, ovulation kits test for the presence of, let's try another one here. Hey, this is the common brand for the ovulation kit. You can get it from Dollarama. Yeah, it says on the box, right? LH search right there. And you can see it. The answer is LH. And that is it for the reproductive system. I do want to go through one more questions with you before we say goodbye for today. We'll leave the males to Wednesday. We have time. We will start on the endocrine system as well. Okay, so please print the notes. I want to do this question with you. Okay, this drug here, I'll try to pronounce it, is a levonorgestrel. Okay, levonorgestrel is so-called the morning after pill. Right? It's sold under the brand name Plan B. Basically, is something people can take after unprotected sex. Okay, so if someone has unprotected sex and they worry that they're gonna get pregnant, they could take this to prevent pregnancy. Statistically, an estimated 0.6 to 2.6% of women who take the morning after pill after unprotected sex will still get pregnant. On the product's website, and you can check this yourself, it explains this is not an abortion pill. Based on your knowledge of female reproductive system, explain how the drug cannot prevent pregnancy 100% and why taking it will not cause an abortion if you're already pregnant when you take the pill. Okay, so this drug here, the levonorgestrel, is a synthetic progesterone. Okay, synthetic progesterone. So let me give you a moment to think about it. Okay, the two parts of the question here. Number one, why if so when you take it, if you're not pregnant, why doesn't it guarantee pregnancy prevention? And number two, if you happen to be pregnant while you take this, why wouldn't this cause an abortion? Okay, so let me give you a moment to think about it. All right. So let me set the stage. Uh, there's unprotected sex. That means sperm is in the system now. If the sperm finds the egg, then there is going to be pregnancy, right? That's how it goes. So here, there's two situations. Number one, let's say you have not, let's say the person have not ovulated yet. Okay? They had unprotected sex, sperm is in the body, but no egg in the system yet. Okay? No egg, no, no, no egg yet. Ovulation has not occurred yet. How does taking this help the situation? Well, what does progesterone do? All right, let's think back to our flow chart. What does progesterone do? Progesterone will inhibit AP from releasing FSH and LH. It will inhibit the hypothalamus from releasing GnRH. So at the moment you take the drug, if you haven't ovulated yet, basically the progesterone will stop and prevents ovulation through the negative feedback. Okay? How long do you think the sperm can stay in the female body for? Like normally speaking, how many days? Anyone?
2 to 3.
Yeah, 2 to 3 days, okay? Like optimal 3 to 5. After that, they are gone, right? Okay, they die off basically. So if you get basically taking this drug delays the ovulation. So no eggs yet. The drug will delay ovulation through negative feedbacks. Okay? But what if there's already an egg already ovulated? Okay, so in this case, if you already ovulated, and then there is unprotected sex, then the chance of pregnancy is actually quite high. And taking the drug is basically not going to do anything for you anymore. Okay, because if you take the drug, then you will suppress the GnRH, you will suppress the LH and FSH, but the egg is already there. You're not interfering with the egg that was already released. Okay. So if pregnancy is going to occur, then it's going to occur. So basically, it's not about taking the drug or not taking the drug. Okay. It's basically at the moment you take the drug, is the egg already in your system? If it is, then taking the drug will not help. If it isn't, then taking the drug will basically prevent the pregnancy at a pretty high rate. Okay. So it's not an abortion pill because it doesn't affect the process of fertilization. If fertilization already occur, again, your body will naturally suppress the AP and the hypothalamus anyways through its own progesterone. So taking the extra progesterone will actually not reverse any of those things. And that is why this is a safe drug to use as emergency contraceptive. That's what they're called, right? Does that like explain it for you? I hope so. Okay, before I go, someone actually asked me to explain positive and negative feedback again. Here, I'll type the definition for you. Maybe it will be better. So in a negative feedback loop, okay, the stimulus will trigger a series of events that will counteract the stimulus. Okay, so I'll give you an example. I'll give you an example. Okay. So, e.g., okay, increase blood calcium level. It will lead to release of calcitonin from thyroid. We learned this last time, which would lead to decrease in blood calcium level. Okay, so like you see the trigger is different from the end result. It's opposite. Okay, it's opposite. Whereas in a positive feedback loop, the stimulus will trigger a series of events that will intensify the stimulus. Okay, so I'll give you another example, like labor. During labor, this is a new example I haven't talked about yet. Okay, during labor, the body releases oxytocin, okay, which would lead to contraction, uterine contraction. And then the uterine contraction will actually goes to the brain and trigger release of more oxytocin, which then will trigger more uterine contraction. And then it will go back to the brain and then more and more. And so it just kind of keep on feedback on itself and it exaggerates, intensifies the signal. That's called positive feedback. Okay. Uh, Women who needs to go into induced labor, they actually inject a little bit of artificial oxytocin into the body. And all it takes is a little bit because as soon as you get a little bit of the synthetic oxytocin into the body, then it triggers a little bit of contraction, and that contraction will stimulate the brain, and then the brain will start to make oxytocin of its own, and then it triggers more contraction and then more oxytocin. So as soon as you have a little bit in your system, it's like pushing the first domino in a cascade, and then it just gets more and more and more intensified and builds up over time, which is what you want to have when you are trying to give birth. You want the baby to be pushed out. Okay. And that is an example of positive feedback. So in the case of estrogen here, right, the trigger for estrogen, if you see over here, the trigger of estrogen is basically GnRH and FSH and LH, right? But then in the end, after you get the estrogen, instead of shutting them down, which would be what happens in a negative feedback, instead of doing that, it causes more of it to be released. And that's why it is a positive feedback. Does that make sense? All right. So that is it. If you have anything else, please feel free to email me. Otherwise, I'll see you guys on Wednesday. We'll finish lecture 11 and start on lecture 12. Okay. Sorry, before you go, in lecture 12, there are a lot of diagrams in the study guide. Please print it out. Okay. We'll be using it substantially. Look at this guy, right? Like you really need to have this diagram in front of you so that we can fill it out. It is the last lecture and it is the most intense one. Okay. So please prepare before you come to class. Thank you. See you guys. Enjoy the rest of the day.
Yeah.